Yeah, I was raised in a non-musical family. My dad played sax in high school, but says that he soon discovered it wasn't really his métier. I don't think he used that word. But my parents insisted that my older brother and I both be involved in sports and music just for our well-roundedness. So it came time at the end of third grade to look at an old-fashioned film strip where they showed us these, what's the word I'm looking for, anthropomorphic pictures of instruments that we could pick. And there was a big goofy bass with a smile, and it was plucking itself. And it was tall, and I was tall. And it was attention-getting, and I was attention-seeking, being the younger sibling. So I chose the bass. And one of the benefits of having chosen an instrument that not many people choose is that there are very few good players. And moreover, you don't have to be very good in absolute terms to be thought of as very good in relative terms. So I became the best bass player in the school because I was the only bass player in the school. I worked hard at that and got a lot of encouragement from my teachers and my parents, and it wasn't demanding, it wasn't stage mom-ishness, it was just willingness to help me stay involved in festival orchestras and youth orchestras and programs like that. The main proponent of Suzuki for the bass is a guy named George Vance, and he was my teacher. And while he was developing his Suzuki method for the bass, I was his guinea pig. I was too old to be Suzuki, but most of his students were younger than me, so he tried out all the repertoire on me. But I wasn't Suzuki in the sense that I learned everything from memory. And went to Peabody Conservatory in Baltimore to continue my studies with Hal Robinson, who I'd studied with in high school. I studied composition very briefly at Peabody under a really talented and genuinely nice guy named Tom Benjamin, who reminded me that composers have deadlines, and if I was not comfortable with meeting deadlines, perhaps I should stick to performing. He wasn't discouraging me, he was just reminding me that composition is work. It's not something you do when you're inspired, and only when you're inspired. It's a craft. And for the first few years of my compositional experiments, I only did it when I was motivated and inspired to do it, and so my output was very small. Now I'm finding more time for it and finding more discipline to exercise the craft of it and not just the art of it. Now this is an interesting story of how I got into composing. I'm glad you asked. The Atlanta Symphony has an outreach program where one of the things you can do in the outreach program is to take a little chamber group into schools, elementary schools or whatever, and do a little demonstration for the kids, play a little concert, question and answer. And I wanted to do some outreach, but I'm a bass player, so I'm not going to do it by myself because nobody wants to listen to a bass. I dragged my buddy Joel along with me, and he's a cellist. And he said, "All right, well, I'll do it, but you got to pick some music for us because there's the Rossini duet for cello and bass that's way too hard to play that early in the morning. So come up with something else to play." So I'd write arrangements of Eine Kleine or Air for the G string or whatever. Well, why don't I just write a simple melody and a bass line to go with it? And why don't I write a bunch more of that stuff? And why don't I write it for bass and bassoon too, because I'm doing an outreach next month with the bassoon player. And why don't I add some percussion to it next time, because the percussionist wants to sit in on the third visit. And Joel was artistic directing this, or is artistic directing this group called the Riverside Chamber Players, and he said, you know, I really like the stuff you've written for our outreach, and thank you for that 2-cello arrangement that you did of that other piece we did, and you seem to be really happy to write music. Do you want to write something for the quartet? No. Well, yeah, because I won something for next fall, and this was, you know, I don't know how many years ago. I said, I don't think I'm ready to write a full string quartet. You know, you have some little movements of mine that you put on concerts now and then just for character pieces, but not ready for a full string quartet. And he, the next day, booked another composer to commission to write something. And the day after that, I called him back and I said, you know, I think I'm ready. Well, you're out of luck. We can do something in the spring. So I wrote Easy Listening, which is the 4-movement string quartet, at the performance of which I gave a CD of to Robert Spano, and it was, I managed to catch him in what I now know are very rare times when he is able to find time to listen to the stuff people submit to him. He's a very busy guy, but he listened to this and he liked it. And I was very anxious to hear from him what he thought of it, with the barest glimmer of hope on the horizon that he might want to encourage me to write some orchestral music sometime for years down the road or whatever. But he said, oh, I loved your string quartet. I want to commission you to write something for the symphony. And I didn't believe him. I thought he was shitting me. Every time I saw him after that, I'd be like, look at him inquisitively, and he'd be like, yeah, really. I'd never written anything for full symphony orchestra. I had, in the intervening years between the time I wrote for the first quartet for Joel, I'd done some string orchestra things, some chamber orchestra things. But full symphony orchestra is very daunting. But as I started writing, I found it's also kind of liberating, because anything you can imagine, any sound you can imagine is possible to you. And you almost have to remind yourself to restrain your compulsion to write more than can fit in someone's ear. Naturally creative. I think everybody is to some degree, but everybody creates in their own idiom, in their own language. The language I create in is usually music, greatly assisted by my short attention span. I'm very easily bored at certain times, and ideas come to me, and then I get kind of obsessed with them, and I pursue them until they're finished. And one of the greatest feelings in the world is when you finish a piece of music, because it's fun to start, and it's murder to work through, and it can be very, very tedious, but you look forward to that satisfaction of having it finished. And then the performance is the icing on the cake. The performance is exhilarating, but you don't have to do any work. You just sit there and enjoy it. That's probably my favorite part of the process. Pieces that the symphonies performed of mine, the personnel manager always asks me if I want to play them. And I have it written into my contract now that I don't have to play my own works, which forces them to have to hire a sub, which I need to sit and listen. I need to enjoy it, because sounds in my head isn't always the way it sounds when it comes out of the orchestra. Isn't ever the way it sounds when it comes out of the orchestra. It's so much better with the orchestra. And I hear things that I did wrong and I can fix next time, I can learn from. I hear things that sound better in a live performance, the way the suspended cymbal interacts with the muted trombones or something like that. It creates something magical that I couldn't have anticipated. Back to the creative process, I'm often inspired by language, by words or phrases that I read or hear. Sometimes the title comes first. That one, it came later. That one I had written a fanfare, and it was just called Fanfare. And I was casting about, like, this piece is, the library needs this manuscript by next week. I need to come up with a title for this thing soon. And I couldn't think of a thing. And then I opened the medicine cabinet and I saw a pill bottle that said may cause dizziness. I thought, that's it. And I Googled it to make sure nobody else had written one. One movement that's, it's kind of obscure. It comes from the first sextet. I had the title first. I read a chapter title in a book that was titled "We Have Cause to Be Uneasy," which just sent chills down my spine. I thought, that's musical. And it suggested itself a pitch and rhythm contour to me. We have cause to be uneasy. And I thought, I can write that. Language inspires me. One piece I wrote in a cappella, SSAA, soprano, soprano, alto, alto, thing that I wrote that got performed by the Atlanta Young Singers a couple of Christmases ago. I thought, I need to write something a cappella, and I need a juicy text. Sat down with some journals of some volumes of poetry, and I was reading Renaissance by Edna St. Vincent Millay, and there was a sonnet in there that was just so touching and sweet and deep. And the music for it just spilled out of me over the course of about 2 hours. I was done. To be successful, it has to be communicative. It has to be true communication. And for true communication to exist, there has to be some message that the performer understands and wants to share, and it has to be shared and understood by someone. And if there's not that sharing on the part of the performer and there's not that understanding on the part of the listener, there's not communication. There's just noise. I think collaboration is one of the highest achievements that we have as humans. The ability to share with someone something that came out of your consciousness, came out of your imagination, and share it with someone to the point that it makes sense to them. Maybe not the same thing, the same sense it makes to you, but it's a really beautiful thing. And it reminds me of when the symphony was rehearsing my last premiere back in the spring of 13. Or in fact, this happens just about every time any group is rehearsing anything I write. They'll turn to me and they say, "What do you want there?" And I want to not say anything. I want to say, "Well, what do you want there? It's your piece too. But you're the composer. You have to tell us exactly how you want these notes played. Are they short or are they long? Which does the accent fall on the first or the second beat? Does the phrase lead to the third measure?" I'd rather they make the decision. I like the interplay, the collaboration, because then whatever resonates among us and is shared gets expressed. Whereas if it's just what resonates inside my own head and they're just reproducing it, it's not really music. And the other factor in that equation is the audience. If they're not given the opportunity to share in that equation, to be part of that equation by being free to respond to it, being encouraged to hear it in their own way, to have something they can take with them, a tune they can whistle on the way out the door that night, it's not a balanced equation unless they're part of it. In an earlier period, I was a church music director, and it was a sort of like a hodgepodge pickup kind of a service. It wasn't a choir and an organ. It was whoever had a guitar and whatever singers were available that week, and if we had a drummer or a mandolin player or whatever. We'd just throw it together. So it was different personnel every week. And my goal for the first 2 months of my tenure there was to do one hymn every week, like the same hymn from week to week, but do it differently every time, in a different key, in a different meter, in a different style. I presented the idea to the pastor, and he was like, people are going to get really tired of singing that hymn. I said, yeah, or they're going to get really intrigued by why the hell are they singing this hymn over and over again? What do I hear differently about it this time? Like, is the way I structure the rhythm going to put the emphasis on different words, different parts of the text, to make them think about what they're singing for a change? Because the interaction, the collaboration of the transmission and the understanding of that message is much more important than the performance. I'm not doing this for posterity. I mean, it's a temporal art. You can't expect something that happened during this 58 seconds on a CD that was recorded 20 years ago to resonate the same in the 58 seconds that I listen to it next week. When we were recording the string quartet CD, I was a little hesitant because I don't want there to be definitive recordings of the stuff I write. I want it to be a little more spontaneous, and I mean, the notes have to be on the page, and that's one thing I'm finding. The more orchestral writing that I do is that you have to be a little more specific the bigger the group is, with dynamics and articulations and tempo fluctuations and rhythms and stuff. You can't just trust them to do it. You could. I trust my colleagues, but if I'm asking 98 of them to play something in the way they think is best, they're going to have 98 different opinions, and then it's going to crash and burn. My colleagues have too much respect for their art to let it be sloppy. But that's where the role of the music director comes in, to put me aside and say, wouldn't a retard feel good here? I hadn't thought of that. Because my computer tempo generator was set on quarter note equals 100, and I've just been hearing it like that. I hadn't thought of putting a retard there, but shit, try it. And that's why you're the music director, because you're capable of making those decisions better than I am. You know more about interpretation and audience presentation and communication than I do. I just write the stuff. Is emotion inherent in music? Well, the shortcut is text. If there's text, then there's much more direct communication of what the composer's intent was and what the intent of the composer for the audience to glean from it was. Hallelujah, hallelujah. It's obvious what he's getting at there. If we played it instrumentally, well, the historic association would still be there. I think it's subjective. I don't think it's inherent. I think it's association. If you think of the Tristan chord, from the Prelude to Tristan, that Wagner wrote this, the dominant of the minor, the dominant of the relative minor. He builds this tension through this chord, and you know the waves are gonna crash down, and it's gonna be this heart-rending minor cadence. And he goes from 3 to 4, and not to 6. And he puts that Lydian 4/3 appoggiatura. I'm speaking composer gibberish now. The horns go ba da da, right before the da 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 da. That's a moment that's like, I don't know if you could call it universal, and I don't think everybody has the same reaction to it, but you can't. I don't think you can escape feeling the impending grief and doom of that dominant chord, leading to the release and the relief that he didn't slay you with 6. I mean, think about the aria from the Goldberg Variations. A lot has been written about that piece. It's justifiably a classic. When you hear that piece in the context of the soundtrack to Silence of the Lambs, when Hannibal Lecter is just the creepiest character ever filmed, and he's in his cell and he's listening to his cassette recorder of the Goldberg Variations, and he's very placidly and tranquilly humming along and conducting to himself, and then goes on this murderous spree to escape prison. And it's the incongruity, the juxtaposition of that is, it makes you listen to Goldberg differently. It makes you think about the character differently too. If he's refined and sophisticated enough to really see the beauty in that and do something so wrong with it. Makes me wonder what I've misunderstood. Thomas Harrison creates something so multifaceted and with that character that I think they really count on sympathy for the character, because he's so admirable in several ways that I think they almost expect you to overlook the horror or to excuse it. And that's why they provide a second villain. Yeah, lots. But part of having a really short attention span is I don't remember many of them. The most recent one that we had that I liked a lot was Thomas Sundergaard. It was very musical and very genial and very competent. There have been a few conductors that Spano, I think, is affiliated with through Tanglewood or through Aspen, that he brings in as assistants for a week or two at a time, or cover conductors. And Giacomo Bairos, who's now music directing Amarillo, is a fabulous young conductor. Oh, Jaap was awesome. Loved Jaap van Zweden. He came in and took charge. He was like, "Why are you sitting so far apart? Move these chairs." And it was refreshing, because orchestras are bureaucracies, and it's hard to get anything novel accomplished other than what's on the schedule. It's scheduled down to how many minutes of rehearsal time you're gonna spend on it, and it's scheduled months or years in advance. And conductors spend months or years preparing, and the musicians spend years preparing how to play the parts. It's when there's spontaneity. Now that can go too far. We had a guest conductor recently, who I won't name, who was inspired to be spontaneous in the concerts after having set up certain expectations in rehearsal with his beating style, his conducting style, and changed his gestural vocabulary in the concerts, and we didn't know how to follow. Quite a few train wrecks were narrowly averted. So there has to be a balance between preparation and spontaneity. The easy answer is Bach. I am biased to think that everyone's answer should be Bach. He was capable of writing some of the most beautiful, memorable, and even heartbreaking melodies in the structure of some of the most amazing craftsmanship of any art form that anybody has ever witnessed. I confess I'm a bear of very little brain, as Winnie the Pooh would say, and I only appreciate a fraction of what Bach did, but it's almost like fractals. Like if you look at the microscopic detail of a fractal, it's a shape, and it's well crafted and it's beautiful, and then you put it in the context of the entire growing and morphing and beautiful thing, and it's just astounding how the details relate to the whole, the micro relates to the macro. Love playing it, love listening to it, love reading about it. I just started reading a new book by John Eliot Gardner about Bach, and I'm anxious to delve more deeply into, because I really respect John Eliot Gardner's interpretations and recordings of that repertoire. Some of my favorite recordings. Well, there are composers I love, and there are composers that I'm influenced by. I'm probably influenced by all of them, but consciously, I love Puccini, I love Shostakovich, I love Sibelius, I love Pärt. I mean, there are composers that I love that I don't think I sound much like Verdi. But the Libera Me from the end of the Requiem, I told Robert Spana this last time we performed it. I said, if I ever write something that's half as good as that, I want to die right then and just be happy with the rest of eternity that I've created something that's unspeakably beautiful. Yeah, I play at North Avenue Presbyterian Church in the contemporary service, which is kind of folk rocky usually. I'm usually on bass guitar, sometimes I'm on upright bass. It's a nice outlet for, it's good for my mind to be able to comp, to see just letters written on a page that denote the chords that they're going through, and have to come up with a part that complements the rest of the band, because the notes aren't written for you. You just make them up. So it's keeps my mind happy, and it's also fun to be the only player on a part. Whereas with the orchestra, I'm one of a bunch of bass players all playing exactly the same thing at exactly the same time in exactly the same way, and I enjoy that part of the job. That's part of being. It's part of the ethos of a bass player is fitting. It's being the sidewalk, the uniform tiles of sidewalk that the main character, the melody, walks on, and it's an important role, and it's a role I cherish. But it's fun sometimes to play out and to be one to a part where you can have a little more freedom to spread your wings. We had a jam session at my house last weekend with some of my symphony colleagues and some friends, where none of us were playing our proper instrument. We had 3 or 4 guitars, a fabulous violinist friend of mine, Dominic Salerni, who you know from this website. He borrowed a little half-size violin, and there was a beat-up old cello and an accordion and an out-of-tune piano and harmonica and a couple of banjos, all variously being passed around different people. Nobody concerned with how they sounded, but more with how they interacted. And somebody would just establish a groove, and we would just roll with it for a while. Some of it sounded like John Hyatt. Some of it sounded like Mark O'Connor. But it was what it was. It was the sound and the feeling created by those people at that time under that condition of inebriation. I wrote a couple of lead sheets just at the computer, not even maybe a half hour each lead sheet. Little melodies with little chord changes. Sure how they were going to sound with the group. One of them I announced after we'd finished jamming on it for a while, this is the worst thing I've ever written. And it sounded, it's what I wrote. I mean, it's what came into my head at that moment that I was writing. And it just happened to sound like the LA Law theme song, but dumber. But we tried it, and we had fun with it, and And another one is a really simple little country waltz. It sounds a little bit like the Ashokan Farewell from Ken Burns' Civil War. Not that that's what I was trying to write, but it was a simple little fiddle tune with guitars, and that's what I had in mind, and that's what it came out as, and it was really, really charming. And I think if I can ever convince these group of friends to play out somewhere, to book a show at Eddie's or something, you'll hear that tune. I was having a discussion with a friend about education and how music as part of a kid's education makes them well-rounded. And I thought about that expression for the first time, and I don't want kids to be well-rounded. I want them to be pointy-edged. Rounded things don't have an impact. They don't affect their environments as much as things with pointy edges that poke and that cause aggravation or inspiration. So I think we should be raising pointy-edged children. Triangles. Do I listen to music? Pretty much constantly. The past couple of years, yeah, I've gotten back into listening to classical music. Honestly, for quite a few years I didn't, because it spoils you so much to be on stage with a great orchestra, but to hear it on even a decent stereo system is just disappointing. But maybe I've mellowed. I have varied tastes, but I have populist tastes. So I can almost always find something on some radio station that I'm enjoying listening to. The stuff I've liked the most lately, like M83, The Shins, Lumineers. I like pop music. Pop music is pop music because it's popular. It's popular because people like it, because it resonates with people. You name a band, I probably know some of their music and like it. Yeah, his Hallelujah, I mean, especially in the I guess, definitive Jeff Buckley recording. Love is not a victory march, it's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah. Powerful. It's saying something. I like pop music, but I like quality crafted music and lyrics. I don't usually like ooh baby baby, ooh ooh baby baby, because it's not saying anything. One of my favorite lines from the song recently is from the insipid title Ho Hey by the Lumineers. It's a really poignant breakup song, and there's this one little twist in the lyric that I might be the only one who's ever noticed it, and I'd like to believe it's intentional. In one of the last verse, he sings, "I don't think you're right for him. Think of what we might have been. If you took a bus to Chinatown, I'd be standing on Canal and Bowery." And he doesn't say, "and you'd be standing next to me." He says, "and she'd be standing next to me." Because in the midst of that verse, he realized he was alone. And just that change of pronoun makes that verse mean so much more. It breaks my heart every time I hear it.